Joining me this afternoon. And to give us some more context about this memo, I want to talk to Ned Price. He's an MSNBC national security analyst. Before that, he was a special assistant to President Obama and a senior director of the National Security Council. Also joining me here in New York is Midwin Charles. She's an attorney and legal analyst and a contributor to Essence magazine. Midwin, I saw you nodding there as Jason Johnson was talking about all that the House Intelligence Committee is charged with doing and supposed to be doing.
Exactly. And, you know, he makes an excellent point. You know, you basically have to ask the question, okay, so on today's episode of America's Next Top Memo, I mean, that's exactly where we are as a country. And you have to ask yourself that when you talk about these dueling memos, and I understand why the Democrats felt that they had to do it, because after you read both memos side by side, it becomes abundantly clear that the Republican memo that Nunes wrote was misleading. It left out very important information. And I think it's important to note that he said himself that he didn't even read the October 2016 visa warrant application, which I think just begs the question, what is he even talking about? But we have to be concerned as American citizens that this Intelligence Committee is not perhaps doing the work that they ought to do. What about all the other investigations that they ought to be focusing on? What's happening with that? You have all these congressmen running around talking about this memo and that memo and this memo and that memo, which, okay, I get it, but how much time is being spent on other issues of national security?
Ned Price, you've got Republicans, the president in particular, holding up Devin Nunes, saying that he's done yeoman's work here, shedding sunlight on something that most Americans, I think it's fair to say, don't understand. That's how the FISA courts work, how this process is supposed to work. What's the takeaway from all this, the back and forth that we've seen?
Well, David, I would actually go back to something one of your previous guests said, and I would vehemently disagree with it. This is not a case of he said, she said. This is a case of Nunes claimed and Schiff came back with a devastating body blow in the form of a 10-page memo that point by point refuted what was in the Nunes memo. You take a look at what Chairman Nunes was trying to do. It was not about FISA reform. It was not about surveillance abuse. In fact, Devin Nunes has always been a cheerleader of FISA, has always been a cheerleader of the intelligence community, including electronic surveillance. So this has been a canard the whole time. This was a total charade. What this was about was trying to discredit the Mueller investigation by claiming that our law enforcement and intelligence professionals illegally used this dossier to wiretap an American citizen. What the Schiff rebuttal makes very clear is that to the extent any information from the Steele dossier was used, it was used very narrowly. And the court was fully apprised of the basis for this information, including the political context in which it was provided to the FBI. So Adam Schiff has done a great service to not only the FBI, to the Department of Justice, to the intelligence community, but also to the American people by releasing this memo, and in so doing reassuring us that our law enforcement and intelligence professionals are meticulously following the law and protocols here.
Ned, I look at this recent memo and I see the redactions, and I want you to place this in the context of the broader conversation we're having about classification, about clearances. That's certainly something that's taking place in the White House right now. What are the consequences of all of this? Shedding new light on the FISA process. What are the consequences of that to how we view and understand classification in this country?
Well, David, I think you actually have to go back to the period before the Nunes memo was released. And you remember at the time the dire warnings from Donald Trump's Department of Justice, from Christopher Wray, the FBI director, all claiming that the release of the Nunes memo would have grave consequences for our national security. And those were not hollow claims. In fact, even the Democrats on the Intelligence Committee, on the House Intelligence Committee, were not eager, certainly not eager to release a Nunes memo, but also didn't want to release their own memo. If they had their druthers, they would have preferred that both memos remain secret, because by authorizing the release of information about the FISA process, about all that goes into FISA warrants, you can have a couple devastating effects. One, the intelligence community could be less willing to share information with congressional overseers if there is a precedent for Congress just releasing their information willy-nilly. And two, these are important tools that the intelligence community has at its disposal, including the power associated with the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. If an intelligence operator or analyst were to feel that should the political winds change and a FISA application, for example, were to be made public in a political context, that he or she could be under the gun, could come under scrutiny, you could certainly imagine some of our intelligence professionals thinking twice or not moving forward at all before filing a FISA surveillance warrants. And we have to remember what FISA does. It protects us against foreign spies, against terrorists, against proliferators of weapons of mass destruction. It's a very important tool that needs to be used, but needs to be used judiciously, as it seems to have been in this case.
Midwin, last question to you. These investigations are happening in parallel. There were so many developments in the Robert Mueller investigation as well, including Rick Gates pleading guilty. What did that say to you? He described the motivations for doing that as he faced headlong what could be a very long and expensive legal process if he would continue to maintain his innocence. Paul Manafort saying in a statement, despite all of this, he plans to continue to maintain his innocence. What do you make of what happened on Friday last week?
Well, what I make of it is that Mueller is doing what I think is a spectacular job in the way in which he is strategically deciding who to go after and how to go after each one of these individuals who are alleged to have some role, whether it be in defrauding the United States or their role, if any, in Russian interference with our 2016 election. Now, Rick Gates is correct. I have worked on some of these investigations at my old firm. They are expensive. They take a long time. And in terms of legal fees, I can assure you that the only people winning in this investigation are the attorneys because they are making, a ton of money. But for someone to stand up in court and go through the process of what's called allocution, which is where you stand before a judge and you say, yes, I did this. Yes, I did this. Yes, I am pleading guilty to these charges. And I understand the charges. That's a huge deal. I mean, that's a huge deal. For you to come from saying, I'm going to maintain my innocence, and then to say, I'm going to plead guilty. And these aren't minor charges. These are all felonies. These are all federal charges that carry sentences in jail. So I think that there's a lot more that we're going to hear. I think Rick Gates is probably going to be providing additional information to Mueller. And the saga will continue.
There you go. Midwin, thank you very much. Appreciate it. That's Midwin Charles, Ned Price joining me as well.